ProCognita, Get Agile podcast. Training from the back of the room. Interview with Nicole Fleming. So Nicole, what is training from the back of the room?
Yeah, so Training from the Back of the Room is a book that has been written by Sharon Bowman, and it's also a training class that is based on content in the book. And it's all about teaching instructors to use cognitive neuroscience to help their participants learn, and it's done in a collaborative, very learner-focused way.
So we basically move from teacher speaking to people and more teacher listening to people, right?
Absolutely. What we like to say is that you're moving from more of a sage on the stage to being more of a guide on the side. You're facilitating your learners through the content rather than just giving them a fire hose of information.
And also we get few principles behind training from the back of the room, and one of them is about doing things differently. So I would like to warmly welcome Nicole Fleming on Get Agile podcast. My name is Tomasz Wykowski, and we're here to talk about different approach to training or learning.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's get into those principles. So there are 6 principles. Can we a little bit look into those ideas? What are these?
Yeah, so you mentioned the first one, different trumps same, and what we're doing there is we're asking instructors to mix it up a bit. Don't always use the same activities, and if you can, throw in some surprise and some novelty on your students, and that really helps them remember things that you've taught them. One of our other big principles is movement trumps sitting, and that is asking attendees to move around a bit. When you're moving, you're getting more oxygen to the brain, and you're keeping your attendees more alert, and you're actually helping them focus better. We find that to be a challenging one in the virtual environment. Most of the time we're sitting at our computers like you and I are here. So we're looking for content-related ways to get our attendees to move. Another one of the brain science principles is images trumps words. And we find that the brain has almost unlimited potential for images. And when we tie images to words or have our attendees draw images that represent what they've learned, it helps them process that information and actually remember it better. One of our other principles is talking trumps listening. And this tends to be a very controversial one for people. And the way I like to explain it is your attendees are talking about the content. They're not just chatting with each other off topic. So if you are getting your learners to discuss and really talk about what they're learning, they're processing it several times. And also we know that when you teach something, you're internalizing it better and you're learning it better yourself. So that's a great one. All right, so how many have I done there? Is that 4?
We get a pretty good list. So one of the interesting things from my perspective for looking at the training from the back of the room, we move from the traditional approach of one person has the knowledge and basically the teaching is about me talking. We move to I shut up and most people listening, and this is what the TBR for me, training from the back of the room is. And also what I discovered, it may be difficult for both trainees and trainers to move from the approach of let me tell you to let us discover together. So how about that?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So as you mentioned, instead of the facilitator giving all the information, especially by lecture, we're having our attendees learn from each other. And in a virtual classroom, it becomes a little bit more challenging, but the way we tend to do it is smaller groups in breakout rooms, and they're completing activities, sharing what they've learned, and they're sharing the knowledge that they already have. And that does tend to be really difficult for a traditional instructor to move away from being, the expert in the room to allowing the attendees to kind of be the experts themselves. But yeah, that's a really great point.
Which reminds me that I completely forgot to start with mentioning that you are training from the back of trainers from the back of the room, certified trainer, but you're also a person who certified trainers from the training from the back of the room. So you get a lot of knowledge in this area, I guess.
Yeah, I've actually had the benefit of traveling and working with Sharon Bowman for the past 6 or so years and helping her with classes. In fact, Tomas, that's how you and I met in Minneapolis at a certification course. And so I have picked up a lot of that knowledge and information. And working for a training company, I really got to see that put into practice. So yeah, I've become a certified trainer, and since Sharon has moved more away from the training, she has asked me to take on the certification portion of it.
And everything's changed a year ago. So you already mentioned this one that when we moved to virtual world, it's a little different. So one of the things we knew, especially in Agile community, is if you want to do the training well, then do this in physical environment. And we were supposed to move to virtual world 1 year ago. So, how do we move the TBR ideas into the virtual world?
Yeah, that is the key there. So after doing a lot of research on people who are doing virtual training well, what we've learned is that one of the trumps I didn't mention is shorter trumps longer. And that really applies in a virtual setting. What we've learned is that most virtual trainings that are done well are actually 60 to 90 minutes. And we have found that we can stretch that out to about 2.5 hours as long as you're giving plenty of breaks, you're making it very interactive and collaborative. If you stretch it out beyond that, you really get into what we've learned to call Zoom fatigue over the last year or so. And that makes it really hard for your attendees to process what's going on. And the brain gets really tired doing that in a virtual setting. So that's one of the biggest things, is that we're moving away from taking that 2-day class and transferring it into a 2-day virtual class. We're actually breaking it up in various sections.
Yeah, so basically the different idea is like having a shorter section, like you said, a few hours. Some trainers are trying like 4 hours. Some trainers, what is interesting, what I noticed is like some trainers are moving like a 2-day training into 4 weeks, so 4 times 4 training. Any other hints from your perspective to make the life of the trainee easier from the learning online?
Yeah, moving it into shorter sections, I find that some attendees, are able to schedule that in their day easier. If they're asking for 2.5 hours off instead of a full day off, that tends to go a little bit easier. They can still work, while they're attending the class. One other huge benefit we see is we can incorporate more spaced practice. And what we're actually doing is we're flipping the classroom. We're doing a lot of the teaching of the content outside of the virtual space. So when our attendees are coming and joining in the virtual class, they're actually just practicing what they've learned. We've taken the content, we've delivered that in videos and reading and different activities that they can do on their own. And we find that the value is coming together to collaborate on, the practice of it and then the learning that has taken place. And so leveraging some of those, very beneficial things, and that's not just in a virtual setting. Spaced practice is also very important in a face-to-face setting, but logistics don't really allow that to happen well. When you book a venue, usually it's for a half day or a full day. You can't usually ask for 2 or 2.5 hours. So it's just taking some of those, those things that you can leverage really well in a virtual environment and applying them to help learners. And they've really enjoyed it. So we've gotten some really great feedback from the learners about how they like the shorter sessions and how they really enjoy the interactivity and also the discussions that go on.
Yeah, and it's easier to fly for a 2-day course rather than a 1 week of half-day course. So cheaper, easier to from the logistic perspective. But what you say is like if I'm home, then it might be easier for me to do this like a 2.5, 2 hours, 3 hours. One thing you mentioned is like you move a lot of learning or education, offline, so outside the Zoom or outside the classroom. My experience is if I do it well, then I have like 60% of my class doing the homework. So did you find any magic trick to address that?
Yes, that is another big question that we get. How do you get people to do that work outside of the class? And one of the biggest things that we've found is explaining beforehand the requirement of we call them warm ups and follow ups, which is just a nicer way to say homework. But really explaining how much time they're going to need to spend, explaining that the class is set up with that information they're learning on their own, and it will not be duplicated once they come to class. One other huge way we get people to do that work is we're building in that accountability. So we're letting them know that, what they've read before they come to the session will actually be incorporated into one of the activities. And we let them know that they're having a discussion about it. So they're accountable to their other learners if they've not done it. And that seems to be a really big motivator for people.
Okay, I'm gonna use this one. Yeah, so the learning is not just going to happen during the call. It's going to happen outside the call. That's pretty cool. So, any other tips or tricks to make their life, I mean, the life of attendees easier?
Well, we find, when we do a face to face class, we like to make the room really colorful and interesting. We put up posters, we put fun things on the tables, and when they come in, they immediately know that this is a different experience than their normal, corporate training, if you will. And that is very different in a virtual setting, as you can imagine. But what we do is we use whiteboards. There are several to choose from. We use Miro or Mural, and we kind of transform the classroom look into that whiteboard. And so we make it really fun and colorful and interesting. And it's a great space for people to collaborate and do activities and have a record there of everything they've learned. So that's one way to do it. Another thing that we do is we add a collaboration piece. So we tend to use Slack, and we get people on Slack collaborating with each other even before the sessions start. So right at the beginning, about a week before the first session, we invite them. We have we ask them to go introduce themselves. And that collaboration continues throughout the entire course. We're asking them to summarize what they've learned, go write an important takeaway on Slack, and then we're asking them to also respond to other posts that people make. And we find that people like to continue that even after the session ends. So weeks after, we'll keep the Slack channel open, and people will still be sharing what they've practiced, what they've taken away and put into application.
Yeah, which is great because one of the things I'm mostly missing during the online training is people having the breaks is the best part of the online of the physical training. I mean, people go to the coffee machine and they start to talk to each other, and someone say, okay, that's what I just heard from the trainer is not going to work, and other people are saying it is already working in our environment, so I don't need to explain that stuff to people. That people explain to each other. They have a coffee break, they have a lunch break. So what I'm hearing is you get Slack for this one.
Yeah, you have to be very intentional about allowing those other conversations to go on, and Slack is a great place for that.
The other challenge I've noticed with the online courses is like uh, you can get super easily distracted. I mean, like, in the classroom, there are phones we can put on mute, there are laptops we can close. When you're staying home, there's just way more difficult. I mean, you have phones you can easily look at, and no one even is seeing that you're looking at those phones. You can have laptops, or you're looking at the laptop, so you don't know if I'm playing something or watching my Facebook or enjoying the training. And finally, you have kids home. You have thousands of things happening at your home. And did you find a solution for this one?
Yeah, the best way that we have found is to actually keep people engaged. So in the virtual setting, we find that we need to ask our learners to do something every 3 to 4 minutes. And in a face-to-face class, that's usually every 10 to 15. So yeah, you're completely right. We have our dogs, our cats, our kids, so many things going on. And so we're really working to engage people in the experience. We do very little lecture. As we said, most of the content gets delivered outside of our session together. So people are more, talking with each other, or they're completing activities. So really that engagement is the best way to keep people from getting distracted and wandering off.
So kind of interesting because in training from the back of the room, we base on often on conversation in the small group. So diverge and merge. We have, you said, like 10, 15 minutes we talk, and then we send people into the room. We have this in Zoom. We have this in Teams. After a year of development, they finally come up with this one in Teams. But what I discovered is like. When you're using this in online environment, it usually takes longer for people to go into the room, start the conversation, finish the conversation, and come back. So it's harder I mean, it's super easy in the physical world to have a 2 minutes conversation. It's harder in the online world. Is it just my experience, or you have similar one?
Oh, no, you're exactly right. You will find that everything in a virtual environment takes 1.5 to 2 times longer. So, when you're talking about 8 hours in a face-to-face class and 8 hours in a virtual setting, you're not going to get through as much content. It just can't happen. And so that's one of the benefits of the flipped classroom, is asking people to do some of that work outside, and you can still get the same information across. But yeah, we really try to break it up between some individual work, some, group discussions, smaller group discussions, and then larger group discussions. Now, one thing that also really helps facilitate the discussions is the fact that we're limiting our number of attendees to 12. So the days of, 20, 30 people together in a class, that's very different in a virtual setting. It's much, much harder to have a group conversation with more than 12 people. And you can't really see everybody's face as well once you get everybody on Zoom. And that's another thing. We ask people to keep their cameras on. We're asking for a lot of hand signals. We do, thumbs up, thumbs down. We check for understanding, having them stand up, stand down. And that's just a good clue to the instructor that, yeah, everybody's understood, everybody's, participating. So
So you touch on the movement. I was hoping we'll get there sooner or later. So you touch on the on standing up, standing, moving. So specifically hints. So how you do it, like when you do it, what you recommend to people, so to make sure that they're not falling asleep or having a back problem after 2 days of training.
absolutely. Movement is one of my big things. I have a hard time sitting still for long. And I kind of have the mentality that the more that you can do that's content related, the better. So we will sometimes check for how people are feeling on a topic. Do you feel like this is something you can take back implement right away, or do you need a little bit of time? And we'll do a similar type thing to constellations. So if you're ready to roll, you're understanding, you can go back, apply it immediately. I'd like you to get up and stand real close to the camera. And if you're not quite there, you're taking a couple steps back, as much as your space allows. And then if you really feel like you need to do some more thinking and more research on it, stand back as far as you can from the camera. So I really like those type of activities. Another one that I've found to be really valuable is just writing on a Post-it note. So it might be one thing that you want to take back and implement immediately. So take 30 seconds, write it on a Post-it note. When you're done, get up, go put it on a place where you'll be reminded to use it, whether it be your bathroom mirror, or it might be on the refrigerator or the coffee machine. So it's things like that really help get the movement in there. And, with trying to add even more movement, you run out of ideas for content related things. And so even just asking people to, take a quick stretch their arms to the ceiling, stand up. During the breaks, we ask people to shut their camera, their mic off, go walk around, even get some fresh air if they can. So just little things like that will help.
And don't check email during the break, right?
Yeah, that's one thing that we ask that instructors don't. If they're running short on time, don't cut those breaks out. Those breaks are so important.
Yeah, so one of the things I've seen, and we also try to do the same when we're running a training, we ship the physical material, so you get the same feeling of the unboxing the materials before the training, not during the training, but still. So this is one of the tricks we have.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to start going into more TBR direction, and you mentioned already the book, so we're going to post the link to the book under the recording. You mentioned the training. Anything else you would suggest for people to start with?
Yeah, take a look at the Training from the Back of the Room book. Sharon has that. She's got the brain science books, which it talks more about the brain science principles that we mentioned. And then she also has another book. I'm blanking on the name of it. I should have brought it. It's 150 tools and activities. So you don't have to revamp everything. I would say start small. Pick out some nice writing activities, some nice discussion activities that you can incorporate immediately, and just start kind of breaking up your content. So if you normally, lecture in a virtual environment, create some kind of graphic organizer so at least your attendees can take notes or do a little drawing while you're talking. Give them something to do. So just start inserting those activities and break up your lecture or your content into smaller pieces and start small that way.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I took from the training. So you don't have to start big, like trying all those tools that you've seen during the training. So people can, after having this conversation, can be a little scared why I should tell people to move, especially if they're working with the managers who are not used to turning on the camera, which is like one of the pain I've seen in many companies. Is this, like small step is just easier. Okay. Any final hint for people? So like and a tool and a practice you would just say like a super helpful from your perspective, like saving your trainings a few times or something like that.
Well, I would really encourage people to not just take their face-to-face class and transport it exactly to a virtual class. Really think about how you can leverage the technology. And we've talked a lot about, the technology, but we've also talked about, just Post-it notes. The analog tools, the Post-it notes, the graphic organizers, things like that are also really valuable to use. So, take those ideas, Find out what you can use out of what you already have, and then put it in a slightly different format. Make it as valuable as possible in short segments. Really add that movement. One other thing that a virtual setting allows for really well is just a Google search. Instead of telling your attendees the information, get them to do a quick search and report back what they've used. The chat, whether you're using Zoom or some other technology, using chat is a great way to do things. So just explore some of those ideas.
Yeah, and make it easier for people because again, learning new tools, learning new technology, it can slow down the training, especially at the very beginning. So usually what I notice with Miro is like the first day is usually slower because people need to learn the tool, right?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So one thing we really like to do is make the training a safe environment for people. And one way that we're able to do that is we not only start slowly on the technology. So the first session that we do, they slowly learn to use the technology, whether it be Miro or Mural, and build up into slightly more complicated tasks on the whiteboard. But we also add some tech sessions before the class. So if people are newer to the technology, they can come and get some information on how to use it, get practice using it. So that's a really important point, is making sure that you're giving some of that knowledge before people come. So if they haven't used Mural or Miro, they don't show up and they're completely lost and can't participate.
Yeah, and this is part of this homework. So I'm going to close with the final question, which is, you just mentioned the safety, the security on the training, and one of the things that I would assume is like people feel safer in the classroom than in the online setting. But I don't have a data, so the question to you is, how do you see this? Does it change into one direction or another?
That's a great question. I haven't seen any data either way on whether it would be a safer environment for virtual or a classroom setting. One thing that we always give our learners the right to is the right to pass. So if they're not comfortable participating in an activity, that's usually one of the very first things that we go over. We have them draw a little ticket on a Post-it note, and if they're not comfortable with the activity, they can either hold it up and it just says right to pass, or they can say, hey, I'm not sure, I'm not comfortable participating in this one. We do an activity called a virtual ball toss, and we used to we designed it so people would call on the next person to go, because with Zoom everybody kind of jumps in, and then there's that that kind of awkward, oh, who's gonna go? Well, we ask people to hold their hands up, and then the person who has just gone gets to call on the person who has their hands up. And so that just ensures that we're calling on a person who's ready, who wants to participate. And, if you have somebody wanting to pass on everything, it's an opportunity to maybe have a conversation with them outside of the session and find out what's going on. But yeah, that's always built in. That's a really big thing, because being on camera and participating with people you don't know can be really unnerving for people and feel like a very unsafe environment.
Yeah, I would really prefer to go back to the physical classroom. So not just for the participant, but also for me, I guess. So I wish we'd be able to do this sooner or than later. And thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed this one. And as I said, we're going to share some of the links later on under the video. Thank you.
Thank you.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.